What was Dylan and Bethany doing for 8 hours before 911 was called? Let's talk about it. Hey everybody, it's Lucky from Unfiltered Lucky. And today I want to talk about what I think is one of the most mysterious aspects of the Idaho 4 crimes. And that is, why wasn't 911 called for 8 hours? Now, the probable cause affidavit would lead us to believe that these crimes occurred between 4 a.m. and 4:25 a.m. But 911 wasn't called until 11:58 a.m. So from the time that these crimes began at approximately 4 a.m., according to the PCA, and the time that law enforcement was called, that's an 8-hour period. That's a long time. A lot can happen in 8 hours. For example, 8 hours is the average work day. So that tells you how much can happen in 8 hours. Now, the times of the crime, the times that the investigators believe that these crimes occurred was between 4 a.m. and 4:25 a.m. But how do we know that the end point would be 4:25 a.m. if we don't even know what happened until 11:58 that morning? So in the probable cause affidavit, it states that they came to the conclusion that these crimes happened between 4 and 4:25 a.m. because of statements as well as from data that was collected from Dylan and Bethany's phone during that time. So we know that Bethany and Dylan were awake while these crimes were happening. We know that they were in contact with each other between rooms through text as these crimes were occurring. But what were they doing? Why didn't they just run from the house? The sound of somebody's life being taken with a sharp-edged blade is going to be very, very different than just your common party sound. And if Dylan had already looked out her door twice previously to seeing the suspect, then she knew there wasn't a party going on in the house, because she would have known that the first 2 times that she opened the door. So as this is happening, as these crimes are taking place, as 4 lives are brutally taken in this house, these roommates, Bethany on the very first level by herself, and Dylan on the second level across the living room from Xana's bedroom, are texting each other. But they don't flee. I mean, if I'm a roommate in this house and I hear my roommates' lives being brutally taken, my first reaction, my natural reaction, is going to be to flee, to get away from the situation. But they didn't do that. They stayed in their rooms. Both of them had multiple exits to flee from the house. Bethany could have climbed out her window. She could have ran out the front door. Dylan could have ran out the back sliding glass door or climbed out her window at that back patio area. But they didn't. They stayed put. Now, the PCA states that they believe that these crimes ended at 4:25 a.m. But how do we know that? We don't even know what happened until noon. There's an 8-hour lapse of time that we don't know what happened. So how do we know for a fact that it ended at 4:25 a.m.? The PCA states that going through Dylan and Bethany's phone data, that they determined the times from 4 a.m. to 4:25 a.m. But how would we know? Just because Dylan and Bethany stopped texting each other at 4:25 a.m., how do we know that the suspects left the house at 4:25 a.m.? We don't know that. We just know that Bethany and Dylan stopped texting at that time. So, really, we don't know that the crimes ended at 4:25 a.m. We don't know how long that these attackers were inside the house. Now, when the Idaho 4 crimes were first being reported, they basically made it sound like Bethany was in the basement and never heard anything. Just walked out the next morning to this crime scene. So in my head, I'm picturing in my head that Bethany is in some basement cave type of situation where she's not hearing anything else that's going on in the house. It wasn't until I did the virtual walkthrough of the house that I realized Bethany heard everything that happened in this house, I believe. Now, Dylan was right in the center of everything. So I think that Dylan heard everything. But in the beginning, we were led to believe that all these people were sleeping and somebody just crept in the night and took all their lives and then just vanished into the night. And now we know that information is inaccurate. Now we know that the roommates were awake. Maddie was possibly asleep. But we do know that the roommates were awake. We know that Dylan and Bethany were awake because they were messaging each other. So is it possible that Dylan and Bethany were told not to leave their bedrooms? And because they listened as the crimes were being committed, I believe that they were told to stay in their bedrooms and don't come out. And they listened. They didn't flee the scene. They stayed in their bedrooms. They stayed right where they were. So it's possible that if the attackers told them, do not come out of this bedroom for a certain amount of time, it's very possible that they would listen. I mean, these two surviving roommates just heard 4 people in their house having their lives being brutally taken. So chances are they're going to listen. Now, 8 hours is enough time to do a lot of things. So did Bethany and Dylan think that the attackers were still in the house? Did they not know how many that there were? Because if it was just one suspect, it seems like they would take their chances fleeing from the house. But I think that they believed that there was multiple attackers in this house, and that's why they didn't flee the house. But after they believed that the attackers left the house, they stayed in their bedrooms. They stayed put. Now, eventually we know that they did call friends to come to the house. But what time did those friends show up to the house? What time did they come to the house? Now, investigators stated that Bethany and Dylan did call friends to the house before they contacted 911. 911 still hasn't been contacted. So now you have a bunch of people at this crime scene, in this house, contaminating this crime scene, walking through the crime scene. But what time did those people get there? We don't know what time the friends arrived. Now, out of all these people that showed up to the house at 1122 King Road, not one of them thought to themselves, like, there's no first responder showing up, there's no ambulance showing up, there's no law enforcement agencies showing up. Didn't anybody think that, has anyone called 911 yet? They didn't. Nobody had called 911 yet. Now, when there's that much time in between Dylan stating that she witnessed the intruder at 4:25 or 4:20 approximately a.m., and then not calling 911 at all, that leads me to believe that things were happening in this house before they called law enforcement. Were they clearing the house of narcotics? Were they on narcotics? That's a big question, because the coroner said in the beginning of this investigation that toxicology reports she didn't believe really would play a part in any of this investigation. And to me, that's insane, because of course toxicology reports would play a part in this, because it would tell us whether the victims were drunk or whether they were on narcotics, whether they were aware of what was happening to them. So why wouldn't the toxicology reports, play a part in this investigation? So is it possible that the roommates were coming down from narcotics and that's why they didn't want to call law enforcement? Maybe they were clearing the house of narcotics or things that they didn't want law enforcement to find. It seems like there would be way too many people involved at this point. There would be way too many students at this house in order to cover things up or to keep everything quiet. It states in the PCA that law enforcement conducted many, many, many interviews. So, how many people were in this house that morning? Now, there's also been a lot of talk about the crime scene being cleaned up. Was the crime scene cleaned before law enforcement got there? Now, I don't believe that if a complete stranger broke into this house and took the lives of these 4 people, that then that attacker stuck around and cleaned up after themselves. I don't believe that happened. The roommates why would they clean the crime scene? Why would they start cleaning the crime scene? And do we know that the crime scene was even cleaned up before law enforcement arrived? Because we know that there was a lot of people walking around this crime scene before law enforcement arrived. It defies logic. And I believe that is what's so mysterious about these crimes. Why wasn't 911 called for 8 hours? It's not a good look. It creates doubt and confusion, because it seems like anyone in this position, one of their first reactions would be to call for help. But these surviving roommates didn't do that. So what was happening in that house? It is possible that the roommates were told to stay in their rooms and didn't know what time these suspects left the house. Even though it's estimated from 4 a.m. to 4:25, the times that the crimes occurred, we don't know about the endpoint at 4:25 because we don't even know what happened until noon. So how do we know that everything that the suspects left the house at 4:25? We don't know that. They could have been in that house much longer. Maybe they were looking for stuff in the house. Maybe they were searching for something. It just doesn't make sense. It defies logic. Why wouldn't somebody call 911? That's the one aspect of these crimes that I just cannot seem to wrap my head around, because there's a lot more here. There's a lot more in those 8 hours. And I'm guessing that law enforcement has a lot more information about what took place during this 8 hours. But they're not releasing that information. Now, in the PCA, we're getting a small snippet of Dylan's statement in which she does state that she sees the intruder, and she does talk about some of the details, noises that she's hearing, voices that she's hearing. But Bethany, we really didn't hear anything from Bethany. When this first started to be reported, Bethany apparently didn't hear anything. But now we know that that's inaccurate. So why? Why are we hearing later that the roommates were wide awake during these crimes, when in the beginning we were being told that they were just peacefully sleeping in their beds? Something that could blow this case wide open happened during those 8 hours. And I'm going to continue looking into this 8 hours because, like I said, I believe that this is one of the major mysteries of these crimes. Is why wouldn't you call 911 for 8 hours? I don't know. Let's look into it a little more. Let's find out about that. Please like and subscribe and stay tuned for my next video, and we'll see you next time.